Beloved TV actor Gavin MacLeod, best known for his roles on The Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Love Boat, has died. MacLeod played underappreciated news writer Murray Slaughter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. MacLeod's nephew said he died early this morning after months of declining health. He was 90 years old.
Gavin MacLeod spent decades playing villains before The Love Boat changed everything. A studio executive once told him he was too bald and too nice to ever become a star. Then he became Captain Stubing, and the world loved him. But that love came with a cost. His marriage collapsed, his co-star lost her career, and something happened between him and the cast that people still talk about today. The show looked like pure joy on screen. What happened off-screen was a different story entirely. The real truth took years to come out. He came into the world on February 28, 1931, with the name Alan George C., a small boy born in Mount Kisco, New York, to a family that worked hard just to stay afloat. His mother, Margaret, had left school in middle grades, yet she somehow found her way into a job at Reader's Digest during the Great Depression, which already said something about her quiet strength. His father, George, part Chippewa, and carrying the weight of 2 jobs as an electrician and gas station owner, tried to stretch every dollar so the family could survive. Alan was the older brother. Ronald came 3 years later, and the 4 of them eventually settled in Pleasantville, where Alan began dreaming about acting even though his father hoped he would grow into something steadier. Everything shifted in 1945 when George died at just 39. Alan was 14, Ronald was 11, and Margaret suddenly had to hold the entire house together with whatever she brought home from Reader's Digest. Money was thin, and the country was struggling to adjust after the war, so the timing felt almost cruel. Still, Margaret held on. She lived until 2004 and reached 98, long enough to watch Alan shed his birth name and become Gavin MacLeod, a name television audiences would never forget. His father never had the chance to see any of it, not the scholarship, not the movies, not the captain's hat decades later. As he grew older, Alan felt his birth name dragging behind him like a weight. He wanted something stronger, something that felt right for the life he wanted. The first piece came from Beatrice MacLeod, his drama teacher at Ithaca College, whose influence had shaped him in ways he could not shake. He asked her if he could borrow her name, and she agreed. The first name came from a character in a television drama, someone damaged yet memorable, and Alan felt something in that name Gavin that clicked into place. After his time in the Air Force and while ushering and running elevators at Radio City Music Hall, he finally made the full switch. Alan C. disappeared, and Gavin MacLeod stepped forward. His father had wanted him to be an accountant because that meant safety, security, and maybe a quiet kind of pride. But Gavin could not imagine a life behind a desk. He had loved performing since kindergarten, and after George died in 1945, that dream burned even brighter. Still, the pull between expectation and ambition stayed in him for years. When he earned a scholarship to Ithaca College and graduated in 1952 with a fine arts degree, the decision was finally settled. His life would not be a safe one. It would be a creative one, no matter how unsteady the path. Right after graduation, the Air Force claimed 2 years of his life from 1952 to 1954. When he returned, he moved straight to New York City, pockets nearly empty, but heart full of plans. He worked as an usher at Radio City Music Hall, then as an elevator operator making only $37 a week, just enough to keep him going while he chased auditions. He had no idea that on the same stage where he guided audiences to their seats, the woman who would become his wife was dancing under the bright lights. Her name was Joan Rutvik. She was a rockette, and he fell for her quickly. They married in 1954 when he was 24, and started a family that eventually included 4 children: Keith, David, Julie, and Megan. Years later, after their divorce in 1972, he would admit that he had not been ready. He said he was 24 on paper but 12 inside, and emotional immaturity made the marriage harder than he understood at the time. The regret stayed with him because the love had been real, even though he could not handle the responsibility that came with it. But before any of that unfolded, something important happened on Broadway. On November 9, 1955, Gavin walked onto the stage of the Lyceum Theater for the opening night of A Hat Full of Rain. It was a gritty story about addiction and fractured families, and the production ran for 398 performances before closing on October 13, 1956. That role gave him the courage to leave New York and try his luck in Los Angeles. Without that break, he might have stayed an usher forever. Television found him next. In 1957, he made his first appearance on The Walter Winchell File. In 1958, he played Turk in The True Story of Lynn Stewart and made his feature film debut as a police lieutenant in I Want to Live. He was 27 and finally moving, but something unexpected threatened to define him before he could define himself. Back in college, during a play, he had used gray hair coloring to play an older character. Instead of washing it out each night, he left it in for 2 full weeks. When he finally scrubbed it off, large clumps of hair disappeared with the dye. He was 18 and suddenly bald on top. Hollywood took one look at him and saw villains. He became the sneering face on Hawaii Five-0, the criminal in The Untouchables, the heavy in countless guest roles. He tried to bring complexity to each character, saying later that he played every villain as someone who believed he was doing the right thing. Then came the blow that nearly crushed him. A studio executive told him he was too bald and too nice and lacked star power. It was a rejection sharp enough to cut deeply, especially for a man working so hard just to be seen. What they could not predict was that the warmth they dismissed would one day make him Captain Stubing on The Love Boat, a role millions adored. Before that brighter chapter arrived, darker ones waited. In 1962, he joined McHale's Navy as Joseph Happy Haynes. The name felt like a joke to him because inside he was drowning. He had only a few lines a week, sometimes none, and the show put him in the background as if he were part of the scenery. He had taken the job to support Joan and their 4 children, but the emptiness wore him down. Depression settled into him like a heavy fog. When his friend Ted Knight visited the set, he pulled Gavin aside and said something meant to be helpful but devastating to hear. He told him he looked like a glorified extra. Gavin already felt it, but hearing it out loud made everything collapse inside him. His confidence cracked, and the despair grew sharper. He reached for alcohol to quiet the thoughts, thinking a drink would soften the pain. Instead, it deepened it. The more he drank, the smaller he felt. Each morning he dragged himself to set, pretending to be happy, while feeling the exact opposite. His marriage suffered. He isolated himself. The spiral was steady and frightening. One night he drove up to Mulholland Drive, ready to end everything by pushing the car over the edge. He believed his career was over, his life broken, and hope gone. He stood at the brink, but something in him stopped. He later said it felt as if a force outside himself placed his foot on the brake. That moment kept him alive. Afterward, shaken and vulnerable, he drove to his friend Robert Blake's home and confessed what he almost did. Blake listened, then insisted he get help immediately. With support from Blake and his family, Gavin entered rehab and started seeing a psychologist. Recovery was not easy, but it was movement, and movement meant survival. In 1964, he quit McHale's Navy. Before leaving television completely, he appeared in 2 related films released in 1964 and 1965, but his real turning point came when he landed a part in the 1966 film The Sand Pebbles. It was the first signal that walking away from the show that had drained him was the right choice. He stopped drinking during this time and slowly reclaimed his life. But just as his career began shifting, his marriage ended in 1972 after 18 years. The guilt overwhelmed him. He drank heavily again and gained weight rapidly, falling into another dangerous cycle until a nutritionist warned him he was putting his health at risk. The warning shook him awake. Soon after, he met Patty Kendig in 1974, beginning the next chapter of his life. Through those years, he still played villains. He appeared in The Party in 1968 and Kelly's Heroes in 1970 as Moriarty, a tough machine gunner with rough edges. These roles came while he felt fragile inside, creating a strange contrast between the characters he played and the emotions he carried. Blake Edwards had seen something different in him even earlier. In 1959, he cast him in Operation Petticoat, giving him a taste of comedy long before the world knew him as Murray Slaughter or Captain Stubing. Edward's instincts were right. Comedy would eventually reshape Gavin's entire career. When Gavin MacLeod walked into the CBS audition room in 1970, he thought he was going in for Lou Grant, the tough news director with the loud voice and the short temper. He tried a few lines and felt the part pushing against him in all the wrong ways, and that uneasy feeling kept growing until he finally stopped and asked casting director Ethel Wynant if he could try something else instead. He wanted Murray Slaughter, the wisecracking news writer tucked into the background of the script. It was a smaller part, yet there was something in Murray's rhythm that felt natural to him. He had spent more than 20 years being cast as crooks, thugs, and hard-edged heavies, and he felt Murray opening a door his old roles had kept shut. The Lou Grant part went to Ed Asner and turned him into an award winner, and MacLeod watched it happen with pride, because he already knew he had made the right choice. Murray gave him a chance to be warm and funny, and once he stepped into that space, everything around him began to shift and settle in a better way. He stayed with that character from September 19, 1970 to March 19, 1977, appearing in all 168 episodes of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Week after week, he kept showing up as the balding, bright-eyed news writer who loved his work, his family, and the people around him, and the audience kept loving him back. The newsroom felt like a real place because everyone inside it carried their own spark, from Mary to Lou to Rhoda to Ted to Sue Ann. And Murray stood right in the middle, grounding the chaos with a soft smile and a sharp remark. 7 seasons passed with 24 episodes each, and somewhere around 1972, MacLeod realized that people no longer saw him as the villain from his early career. They saw him as the kind one, the trustworthy one, the man who felt like a friend the moment he walked onto the screen. The industry noticed too. His work as Murray earned him 2 Golden Globe nominations for Best Supporting Actor, the first in 1974 and the second in 1976, with the ceremony taking place on January 29, 1977. He never received an Emmy nomination, but that didn't bother him because he watched the show collect 67 nominations and 29 wins during its run. The people he worked beside were winning major awards year after year, and he felt the energy of being part of something bigger than himself. It wasn't about chasing trophies. It was about belonging to a show that changed television while changing his own life in a quiet, steady way that meant more than he ever expected. He poured warmth and humor into Murray, shaping him with gentle teasing and soft edges, especially when he bounced lines off Ted Baxter. Murray's home life added depth to the laughs, with his wife Marie and their 3 daughters, plus their adopted Vietnamese son, expanding the character's world beyond the newsroom. MacLeod's bright grin and the easy way he delivered a joke became part of his signature. Working beside giants like Mary Tyler Moore, Ed Asner, Valerie Harper, Ted Knight, and Betty White gave the show a chemistry that felt real enough to touch. Viewers connected with it because it reflected the small truths of workplace friendships and frustrations. And that authenticity helped the show become one of the most defining pieces of 1970s television. While all this was happening, MacLeod was fighting a private battle he could no longer hide. In 1974, the same year he met Patty Kendig, he stopped drinking completely. Patty had been through her own painful divorce, and both of them understood the cracks heartbreak can leave behind. Before they married that year, MacLeod looked at her and promised that he would never drink again because he did not want to lose the life they could build together. She later told People magazine in 1978 that alcohol had turned him into someone she barely recognized and that his decision to quit cold turkey meant everything. Her support carried him through the final years of the Mary Tyler Moore Show and guided him toward the next chapter of his life. His earlier marriage to Joan Rutvick had fallen apart in 1972 after 17 years, and he knew his drinking had played a part in that ending too. Patty became the steady light he needed, and he stepped into their marriage with a kind of hope he had not felt in a long time. They married in 1974 and blended their families, both bringing children from previous marriages. Patty understood the pressures of the industry because she had acted as well, even appearing on The Love Boat later in life. Their relationship grew during the height of MacLeod's success, and his promise to never drink again became a foundation they both leaned on. But even the strongest promises can shake under too much weight. And when MacLeod became Captain Stubing in 1977, the demands of his new role began to surround him from every direction. By 1981, the long hours, constant travel, and non-stop publicity chipped away at their bond. They divorced after 7 years, though the story between them was far from finished. And the ending they thought they had reached was only a pause before something much deeper. When the Mary Tyler Moore Show closed in 1977, he moved straight into the role that would define him for the rest of his life. Captain Stubing came to him unexpectedly, especially since Ted Knight was also being considered for the part. ABC wanted someone from the Moore cast to anchor their Saturday night lineup, and while CBS built spin-offs for 3 major stars, ABC chose MacLeod. The decision lifted him from supporting actor to leading man. Ted Knight later appeared in 6 episodes as a rival captain, which made the transition feel almost poetic. Taking the captain's chair turned Gavin MacLeod into one of the most recognizable faces on television. The Love Boat began airing on September 24, 1977, and stayed afloat until May 24, 1986. Across those 9 seasons, the show produced 245 episodes and reached 90 countries during its original run, eventually expanding to 95. It continued spawning specials, including the 1990 Valentine Voyage telefilm and a 1998 reunion appearance for a short-lived reboot. The series took on a life of its own across borders and languages, and people everywhere learned the warmth of Captain Stubing's smile. MacLeod found himself stepping into international stardom in a way he had never imagined when he first asked to play Murray. Critics hated the show from the start, calling it shallow and dismissing it outright. But MacLeod never let their opinions shake what he felt the show offered. In 2013, he told the Los Angeles Times that the critics missed the point entirely. The Love Boat gave people a reason to feel good, and audiences embraced that comfort. He kept telling the cast during their first week of filming that the show would be a hit, and he meant every word. His co-stars worried about being typecast or wishing for more dramatic roles, but MacLeod held firmly to his belief that the show's message of love and hope mattered. And he was right. It became one of the most enduring series of its time. During the show's 2nd season, the producers tried shifting Captain Stubing into a harsher, more abrasive figure, expecting MacLeod to draw from his old villain roles. Ted Lang remembered how they tried shaping the captain into someone who barked orders and pushed people down. MacLeod resisted immediately. He didn't want to be the angry captain who ruled by fear. He pushed back with calm conviction, explaining that a real leader guided with understanding. The producers eventually agreed, and Captain Stubing settled into the wise, warm presence viewers came to love. That decision shaped the entire emotional tone of the show. Everything deepened in Season 3 when Jill Whelan joined the cast as Vicky, the captain's daughter. Once she arrived, the emotional heart of the show clicked into place. MacLeod embraced her both on screen and off, becoming a father figure in real life as she navigated her childhood on a major television series. She later said their bond was genuinely like father and daughter, and she trusted him with her worries about boys and about growing up under the spotlight. Their connection grew so strong that MacLeod walked her down the aisle years later. The love between them wasn't an act, it was the real thing, and it flowed straight into their scenes. Despite the show's global success, MacLeod revealed in 2019 that none of the cast received residuals. He said people assumed they were rich enough to buy landmarks like the Taj Mahal, but the truth was far different. Their contracts from the 1970s simply did not include future payments for reruns. It surprised fans who had spent decades watching the show again and again. But MacLeod carried the truth with grace. He said that even without residuals, seeing new generations discover the show was its own reward, and that small piece of joy softened the reality of the situation. By 1981, the success of The Love Boat had taken such a toll on MacLeod's marriage that it finally collapsed. He admitted openly that he had chosen work over Patty, traveling constantly and letting fame consume him. Once the papers were signed, he believed their story was done. He settled into his Beverly Hills mansion alone, assuming the distance between them was permanent. But Patty walked a very different path after the divorce. She experienced a deep spiritual awakening and spent 3 years praying every day for one thing she thought might be impossible. She prayed for her husband to come back. Everything shifted on September 15, 1984. The morning Gavin's mother went in for brain surgery on the left side of her head. MacLeod woke up overwhelmed with fear and prayed desperately for her survival. In that moment, he promised Jesus he would surrender his life completely if his mother lived through the operation. The instant the words left his mouth, he felt a pull toward Patty and called his secretary to find her number. When she answered the phone, he nervously asked if they could be friends. She said yes, without hesitation. He drove to her home that same day, and when she opened the door, she smiled as if she had been waiting all along. She told him his dinner was cold and explained it had been waiting for 3 years. Then she handed him a Bible with his name engraved inside, a Bible she had prepared long before that moment. Their reunion grew from that quiet doorway, and the bond they rebuilt came from a place far deeper than either of them had known before. While all this happened, MacLeod also had to address the tabloid stories that had sprung up during his darkest year. The National Enquirer published a piece in 1981 claiming bitter caste fights on the Love Boat, filled with vague phrases like "one source says" or "insiders claim." Years later, MacLeod explained in his memoir that none of it was true. The cast was professional and kind, and while people sometimes wished for different storylines, there were no feuds, no hidden rage, no cruel battles for attention. The timing of these lies only made that painful chapter harder, but speaking the truth let him finally breathe. On the morning of September 15, 1984, Gavin MacLeod woke up alone inside his quiet Beverly Hills house, and the silence felt heavier than anything he had known before. That same day, doctors were preparing to operate on his mother, who had a dangerous cyst on the left side of her brain and needed surgery immediately. At 53, while the world still saw him as Captain Stubing from the Love Boat, he felt completely empty inside. 3 years had passed since his 1981 divorce from Patty, a decision he later admitted came from selfishness, from choosing work and fame over the woman who stood beside him. Now the guilt of that loss mixed with the fear of losing his mother, and it pushed him to a place he had not been in years. That morning, he dropped to his knees. In that moment of fear, Gavin prayed for the first time in a long while. He made a promise that felt final and honest. If his mother was given more time, he would turn his life over to Jesus. As soon as the prayer ended, something unexpected followed. He felt an urge that made no sense to him, a clear pull telling him to call Patty, the woman he believed was long gone from his life. He asked his secretary to find her number, and when he finally dialed it on September 15, 1984, his voice trembled. He simply asked if they could be friends. Patty did not hesitate. She told him that was all she had ever wanted. What Gavin did not know was that during their 3 years apart, Patty had found her own faith, given her life to Jesus, and joined a small group of Christian actresses who prayed constantly for Gavin and for their marriage to be healed. Later that same day, Gavin went to Patty's house for the first time since the divorce. When she opened the door, she smiled and said something that stopped him cold. She apologized that his dinner was cold and said it had been waiting for 3 years. Those words were not a joke or a figure of speech. While Gavin traveled the world promoting the Love Boat and living a celebrity life, Patty had held on to hope every single day from 1981 to 1984. She prayed, waited, and believed he would come back. Her faith and forgiveness hit Gavin harder than any criticism ever could. That day held another moment he never forgot. Patty handed him a Bible, and when he looked down, he saw his own name already engraved on it. She had done this long before he ever called her. She was so sure in her prayers that she prepared for his return in advance. Patty then told him how her faith had changed her life, how it carried her through the loneliness and pain of their separation. Gavin listened, overwhelmed, and finally said the words that changed everything. He told her that was what he wanted too. The miracle he prayed for arrived as well. His mother's surgery was successful, and she recovered fully from the brain cyst that had terrified him that morning. What began as fear ended in transformation. True to his promise, Gavin began turning his life over to faith, even though he later admitted he had once been afraid of how much it would change him. That single day in 1984 became the start of his spiritual rebirth and the rebuilding of his marriage. 1 year later, in 1985, Gavin and Patty remarried. This time, they believed their union was stronger because it was no longer just the two of them. Gavin described it as a threefold marriage, with God at the top and both of them grounded beneath. Their story became something they felt called to share. In 1987, they wrote a book about their divorce, reconciliation, and his struggles with alcohol. They also began hosting a Christian radio program and leading marriage seminars to help other couples who felt broken. They stayed together for 36 years, all the way until Gavin's death in 2021 at the age of 90. That same spirit of generosity carried into his work life. Cast members from The Love Boat later spoke about how rare Gavin was in Hollywood. He cared deeply about making scenes better for everyone, not just himself. He wanted his fellow actors to shine, and that attitude created the warmth viewers felt on screen for nearly a decade. Jill Whelan, who joined the show as a child playing his daughter, said he became a real father figure to her, someone she leaned on through life long after filming ended. Ted Lang and Fred Grandy echoed the same truth, explaining that the friendships formed on the show never faded and continued for decades after the cameras stopped rolling. Gavin also addressed rumors that tabloids tried to spread during the show's run. Stories about feuds and ego battles that never actually happened. In his writing, he explained how those articles relied on vague sources and invented drama to sell papers. While cast members sometimes wished for better storylines, there was no chaos or rivalry, only professionalism and respect. One painful chapter still lingered for the group. Lauren Tuis, who played Julie McCoy, was fired in 1984 after 7 seasons due to her public struggle with addiction. Years later, Fred Grandy admitted regret, acknowledging that the industry at the time treated addiction as something to punish rather than heal. That realization stayed with him. After The Love Boat ended in 1987, Gavin and Patty continued their ministry work on television for 17 years, starting in 1993. They interviewed couples, shared their own story, and encouraged people who felt their marriages were beyond repair. Gavin later opened up even more in his 2013 memoir, revealing battles with depression, alcoholism, heart attacks, and even a suicide attempt that had remained private for decades. He wrote honestly about insecurity, about losing his hair young, and about how faith reshaped his life. Even in his final years, Gavin stayed devoted to Patty as her health declined. Friends said his optimism never faded. He cared for her with the same commitment that defined their second chance together. When Gavin MacLeod passed away on May 29, 2021, at age 90, those who knew him remembered not just a television captain, but a man who learned how to come back, how to forgive, and how to love more deeply than before.